correct.
Yeah.
To the point most of the time.
Yeah, there's myths and then also misconnections. And that's a very good segue into what we were going to talk about is John Lennon a shithead? And I went back and listened to that, watched that video again with Brian with Concerts That Made Us. We were talking about both of our experiences listening to the Beatles and, you know, different stories that we heard. And one of them was that I guess he mistreat his children and he mistreat like his first wife before Yoko. And I'm glad that you brought that up when we were emailing. Definitely there is some misconceptions about him. Maybe you can tell me a little bit more about go in depth of what the truth really is.
Okay, here is the truth. No, here's a little bit of the truth.
Just a little.
I don't know it all. Okay, so the facts that we know, John Lennon was not a great father to his first son, Julian Lennon, who was born in 1963. And unfortunately, he did a thing that, I mean, I don't have kids myself, but I guess a lot of fathers who perhaps had, let's say, bad fathers or who had paternal figures that didn't fulfill what they wanted, they often unconsciously pass it on when they have their own children. You know, I think that's fair to say. Even though they probably want to do the complete opposite, some of it rubs off. You know, it's just how these things go. So yeah, he was quite neglectful, and he was. There was a letter that Cynthia Lennon had kept from about 1965, and it's John saying, you know, I've been a right bastard, and I'm so sorry that I haven't been there. And Julian Lennon, unfortunately, you know, if you listen to or watch some of the interviews, you know, he had a rough time because John Lennon was. I think he's one of those people that could really cut you down with a few well-chosen words, you know, and when it's your own son that you're doing that to, it's pretty rough. The other sort of charge against him in the cancel culture that we live in is that he was a wife beater. Now, Cynthia Lennon in her book said John hit her once or possibly twice. There was another woman who he dated at art college who said that he whacked her. So he probably did it a few times. This is not to give him a pass, but everyone will tell you, including, I mean, I've actually been lucky enough to speak to people who knew him. Nice. Everyone will tell you that he was a bad drunk.
Okay.
And, you know, I've known people in my life, I never hit women, but probably been verbally aggressive to people when I've been drunk. We've all known people. I had a friend at school who, after X amount of drinks, I don't know, 5 or 6 drinks, whatever it was, there was a point where it's like, you know, the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Yeah, of course.
It's like Mr. Hyde, you know, the devil inside the person comes out. But I also realized with this, I won't name him, but my friend from school, is that I could see that like his eyes would get very unfocused and he'd kind of go into some sort of alcoholic frenzy and he didn't know what he was doing, you know, and he would be violent occasionally. But again, more sort of verbal aggression. So it's not to give John Lennon a pass, but I think it's fair to say that there are certain people who perhaps they have demons deep inside and when they drink, they come out. And I'm sure John Lennon many times woke up the next day and thought, oh my God, what did I do last night?
Yeah, of course.
Probably all had that.
All that, I used to be cruel to my woman and beat her. That's me, because I used to be cruel to my woman and physically. Any woman. You know, I was a hitter. I couldn't express myself, and I fought men, I hit women, I was violent. That's why I'm always on about peace. You see, it's the most violent people that go for love and peace. And I sincerely believe in love and peace, but I am absolutely a violent man who has learned not to be violent and regrets his violence.
John was very, very jealous and very possessive, and I think he actually said that later on in his life. I was aware of his jealousy, and I was aware not of his violence, because I hadn't seen his violence at that point. But, I mean, he didn't beat me up. I mean, he just smacked me across the face, and I hit my head against the pipe in college. And at that point, I thought, well, I've never experienced this in my life, and I don't want to see it again. And I didn't. There'd been an awful lot of nurturing and looking after his delicate ego at that time and his pain. And I thought, well, you know, I can only go so far and no further. So it took 3 months before he actually phoned me and we got back together again, because I loved him, you know, it's as simple as that. It was an instant. It was something that he couldn't help, and he didn't do it again. And I wouldn't have been with him if he had. In fact, that was the first and last time that he ever lifted a finger or a hand to me. So he learned his lesson. He did on the odd occasion have a few altercations with other people in his life when he couldn't help it, and it was to do with booze at the time. He could not take his drink.
I was pretty self-destructive at college too. When I was at art school in Liverpool, it was mainly a one long drinking session. I remember at college, I always got a little violent on drink. I used to have a friend called Jeff Mohammed, rest his soul, who died. He was a half Indian Arab who was my friend at art school. He would be like a bodyguard for me, so whenever I'd get into some controversy, he would sort of ease me out of it. But I do recall at college punching through telephone box glass, you see. I don't like that, waking up and thinking, what happened? Did I kill somebody? The Beatles' first national coverage was me beating up Bob Wooler at Paul's 21st party because he intimated I was homosexual. So I must have had a fear that maybe I was a homosexual to attack him like that. And it's very complicated reasoning. But I was very drunk and I hit him. And I could have really killed somebody then. And that scared me. Paul was 21, so I must have been 23 then. And that was in the Daily Mirror. It was the back page. I remember the picture. It was pretty scary. And it was a kind of rehash of my youth. So it was a kind of self-destructive suicide side of me, which is resolving itself.
But my issue with this whole cancel culture essentially is that I feel like humans are social animals, but unfortunately that often means that they will jump on bandwagons in order to belong, which is a perfectly natural human thing to want to do. But my thing really is, have you actually researched the topic, or have you just heard a bunch of stuff?
Yeah.
And you feel like, oh, that sounds like fun, oh, John Lennon was a shithead, or
Yeah.
John Lennon was a wife beater and was terrible to his son. He was terrible to his son, but, he was 24 at the time, and he was experiencing a fame that no one, apart from probably Elvis Presley or perhaps Frank Sinatra, had ever known. I mean, no one had ever known that level of fame, really. So there's little kernels of truth there, but I would just say, if someone's just jumping on a bandwagon, everyone's entitled to an opinion, of course.
Yeah.
But I feel it's just there's this weird Twitter thing of just piling on people. It's the kind of online equivalent of knocking someone to the ground and then 1,000 people all start stomping on them, kicking them when they're down. He was a flawed person and he didn't hide it. He was very different from other celebrities, that he probably exaggerated the bad things about himself, whereas most celebrities try and hide the bad things about themselves. So he probably went to another extreme. So yeah, to answer the question, there's kernels of truth there, but I think it's all a bit too simple.
Yeah, I mean, all in all, he was just like a regular human being with pretty much the same emotions that most people have, and he tried to deal with it in the way that he thought that was best for himself. Yeah.
Another kind of strand of thought nowadays, particularly with people who are interested in psychology, is sort of diagnosing him. And I had a guy who's actually a professional therapist on, if I could plug his podcast, fantastic, Psychology in Seattle. I think he got pissed off with me, actually, so he never answers any of my emails anymore. But anyway, it doesn't matter. He was on the show and he made a kind of valiant effort. He said, I don't want to diagnose John Lennon because I never knew him and he hasn't been around for 40 years. But essentially, he said, there was definitely a little bit of borderline personality, some narcissism, which I would argue anyone in that position of extreme fame probably would have.
Absolutely.
And then there was probably a little bit of bipolarity and a little bit of depression. So there's sort of signs of various disorders. Which is not to say that he had all of those things, but there's little bits. So I think he just maybe had a bit more of the extremes than the average person. So he might have been perhaps the greatest friend you'll ever have. Again, a lot of people have said. But then he might be like a really, probably quite nasty when he'd had a few drinks, or if there was any reason he didn't like you. So I think it's just a bit more of everything, really.
I never really thought of John Lennon being a heavy alcohol person. I've always thought of him as a heavy, maybe cannabis user, and here and there, I'm going to take a couple of tabs of LSD. Honestly, I've never really thought about him having alcohol. Maybe a couple here and there, but nothing like that.
I don't think he was a heavy drinker, but the problem was he didn't need much.
Oh, okay.
The demons. In the 70s, he was drinking these things called brandy Alexanders, which is brandy and milk. And I tell you, just to give you one story, I got into Kahlua and milk.
Oh, okay, yeah. I'm familiar with that, yes.
Yeah, and the problem is it just tastes like milk. I don't know if Kahlúa's got. Has it got coconut? It's got something.
Coffee.
Right. Yes. Yes. Yeah. It just tasted like a kind of a cup of coffee with a little bit of liqueur in it. And I think on the day we did one of those all day. I think there was a soccer match on, football match, and we were out all day. And I probably had, I don't know, like 15 of them or something. But
whoa!
Yeah, but I didn't over the course of a long period of time, and I kind of felt drunk. But that kind of drink just goes down so well, and it doesn't really taste. It's not like drinking whiskey or brandy. I don't think it's not like drinking like whiskey and Coke or something where you can kind of taste it more. So again, not to make excuses for him, but he was drinking brandy Alexanders, and he probably had 5 or 6 before he knew what was happening.
Yeah, they're good and dangerous if you're sucking something down delicious like that with that amount of alcohol. I mean, some of that alcohol content is very high. But yeah, no, not to make excuses, but I mean, like we were saying, like it's just like any other person would do that sorts of things.